Hey, we're back. And color coordinated today. Nate Bauer in blue, Thomas Frank Carr in the dusty rose here on the show today. Ooh. It's pink. It's allowed to be pink.
I love dusty rose. Love it.
Happy welcome back to the show, Nate. Been off for a couple weeks, been out exploring the world. Do you come back a rested and recovered Nate Bauer?
Yeah, I feel great. Actually, I was back last week for Thursday and Friday, and then immediately went back to New York for a friend's baby shower. So I've just been all over the world. I was at a golf tournament in Lancaster on Monday.
Were you like a celebrity at the golf tournament?
Not in any way, not in any capacity.
Okay.
It was people who apparently were not interested in Penn State football. But
no, did you have other topics to talk about?
I know. Golf. We landed on golf. It was fitting for the occasion. But no, as a parent of two kids, to have I feel like I've really shirked a lot of responsibilities over the last 2 weeks. But I'm back, taking my kids to daycare, doing all this, making dinner again. I'm doing it. I'm back to being a responsible human.
And back on the show to give us your thoughts. I've been waiting to do the show for about a week and a half. I'm excited to dip into these topics about. Hey, this is the time to go on vacation. And these stories aren't going anywhere. What we're talking about today, if you haven't seen the news, we're going to be talking about all the off-field stuff with Penn State football and Penn State athletics overall. The facilities update that has been proposed and approved by the Board of Trustees and designed by Penn State Athletics under Pat Kraft. We're digging into all that today, including the Beaver Stadium renovation. Last time Nate and I talked, we didn't really have a whole lot on the how everything was going to happen. We knew what they wanted to do. Now we've got the information. Nate has had conversations with Pat Kraft on all of these topics, or at least most of these topics. So we're going to get his thoughts and opinions on that today. But we're also going to get your thoughts and opinions today as well. Xander here, he says morning. He's always here, one of our first in the chat. He's quickly becoming one of the regulars here at this offseason. So Xander's with us. Brandon's with us as well. And Ryan says, happy hump day. Robert Bosfield in the chat as well. So if you've got thoughts on Penn State Beaver Stadium renovation, if you've got thoughts on Jeffrey Field renovation, we're going to be talking about all of that today on the show. So please, if you feel like it, donate to the channel with a super chat, but we'll be talking to you throughout the chat. And of course, subscribe here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel and hit the notification button so that you're here bright and early, 10 a.m. on Wednesday to talk about Penn State sports. Not just Penn State football today, sports. So the renovation schedule.
But mostly football.
Mostly football. That's where we're starting. We're going to start with Beaver Stadium, the renovation project that we talked about before. And if you want to go check out our previous conversation about this, you can find that on our YouTube channel. But here is the proposed timeline, which is the new information. So Nate, please break this down for us as far as what these sections mean. And are you serious? 2027? That's going to be the end date of this in 4 years.
Yeah. Yeah. So look, like the AE selection means architect and engineer. So they are in the process. They've already sent out basically there are other people who are far more knowledgeable about the actual process of bidding out a project and how that all works than me. But this is my layman's understanding. They send it out to 10 of the top firms, right? So companies that specialize in the stadium space to basically say, hey, this is the project. We're looking to do a $700 million renovation. We're, demoing the West Stands in Beaver Stadium. Bid on propose to us a plan, right? I'm not exactly sure how far along the design has to be. It's more along the lines of this is a rough sketch of a proposal. Okay. So they get 10 bids from those different companies. And in June, they will narrow those down and try to get, I think it goes to 3 and then eventually 1. And so they choose it. They'll try to choose it by June. And from that point, there's a year of design. Can you go back to the graphic so I can actually?
Sure. Because
I have to remember.
It sounded a whole lot like these are my top 5 schools. Thanks to everyone who's participated. So we're down to the top 3 schools. Are they going to come out with an awesome graphic with neon and transitions? Because I'd love to see that from Penn State Athletics.
Penn State's gonna tweet it out with "respect my decision" when when they finally land on, and this is like super geek stuff, but I love it. It's like the Populous, right? Who knew what Populous was? And people do know who Populous was, but I'm just saying to the normal person who isn't paying attention and isn't aware of that space. But these people do projects everywhere. They're doing all of the major stadiums. They do a ton of work. Penn State's worked with them previously. And so you're trying to figure out all of those. You're trying to narrow it down and land on one, and then from there, it's a year before they actually have like the plans. And so all this stuff, like there's just a ton. If you could imagine it as just literally getting like the wheels in motion, it's creaking. It's starting to happen where they've narrowed their focus. They know what project they want. They have to go out and do it. And this is the very earliest stages of that process.
Okay. So the way it was described, and maybe we're jumping ahead a little bit here, but I think this is an interesting point to interject this, is Penn State is not taking one study that they did. From what you said, from what you could read over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com of what Pat Kraft told you, is they kind of cherry-picked what they liked from different studies. So is this kind of a result of, hey, here are all the things we want that we picked, now we need somebody to redesign with all of this in mind, and then we'll pick our favorite of that? Because it seems like this is a second layer of, didn't they just do this? Didn't they just get the plans they wanted? But that doesn't seem to be the case.
No, so there were studies that were done. So one thing, just to Ryan Sheard, it was an RFP. That's what's out there right now, is that RFP, the request for proposal. So he sounds like he knows what's going on, or at least how the process works. So Ryan, if you want to chime in with 20 more comments, that would be totally appropriate. But in the meantime, there were 3 real options. The way that it kind of worked itself out was $1.5 billion for a new build stadium. Okay.
Yep.
$1.2 billion to completely renovate the stadium. So you're salvaging what you can, but for the most part, you're doing a complete stadium renovation. And ultimately, what they landed on was $700 million for I'm going to call it a renovation, but I think that there's a little bit of the story that's getting lost here, which is to a person who's sitting inside Beaver Stadium. The only thing that will look different is the West stands. And I'm not saying that that's nothing. That is a significant change.
Yeah.
The West stands will be torn down. The press box will be torn down, and an entirely new structure will be built there. However, the south end zone, the decks, the north end zone, that deck, and the east stands and the east luxury suites will not change. They might get touched. There might be small improvements, and there's a ton of work that needs to be done there. But one of the reports and one of the things that was acknowledged through this process was there's like $200 million of backlog maintenance upgrade kind of stuff that needs to be done. This is like very unsexy stuff that has to be done to ensure the survival of the stadium. And so, like I said, I just had an interview with James Franklin yesterday, and he brought it up. He was like, excuse me. He said, you're at the point where if you don't do something, you're still at a stage where you have a choice, where you still can have some level of agency over how you do this, when you do it, what you do. But there's going to come a point where you don't have that anymore, because the stadium is that old. I brought this up. I think I brought this up here at one point, that there's steel in there from the 1930s, right? Like this is a very, like, as constructed, it's a 63-year-old building, but that was a stadium that was moved from its prior location. And so there were elements of that, I mean, it's just kind of wild when you think about what that stadium really is. It's not going to fall down. It's not, right? That's not the issue.
Right.
I know people took objections to that previously, but it is in a state of, you need to do wide-ranging, improvements that I think will be addressed. Like, some of them will be addressed. They're going to widen the concourses. They're going to make it easier to get up and down to higher levels of the stadium. But on its face, this is really a $700 million project to install a luxury suite, like a box that includes the press box with a ton of luxury amenities, and then a redo of the West stands.
Yeah. Is there, and of course the concourse and all the other things that we talked about are part of that, but it sounds like, the full renovation versus the bells and whistles. It seems like Penn State tried to take a very economical approach to this and take what they absolutely needed, because the cost of construction and the cost of materials, not that this is an economics podcast, but you don't have to be a genius to know, wow, things are way more expensive than when you originally built Beaver Stadium. Yep. Things like inflation has caused, and the cost of materials makes it so, as Ryan says here in the chat, maintaining structures costs a lot of money. People don't take account into that as well. He referring to what you said about the $200 million in deferred maintenance that they need to do. Yep. So you can't sink all of this into a shiny new building when you also have to upkeep that building and, pay for all the other surrounding things around it. So do you think that what's your evaluation of the plan? Like, what do you think about this?
I think that some people are going to be disappointed by it, but I don't think that I'm not sure that that's relevant. I don't know. I mean, it's all very interesting to me, because there were, to me, I see a $1.5 billion new build as being the best option long-term. Mm-hmm. I don't think financially it was ever really very feasible. And I think that they know that. I think that it was a combination of, it's so complex. There's so many different layers to this, but one, you have a stadium that is considered one of the best atmospheres in college football, like just front and center. Yep. Do you want to tear that down? Do you want to not have that anymore? Do you want to take your gamble on something new? No, like instinctively, no, you don't want to do that. Can you pay for a $1.5 billion new stadium? No.
Yeah.
No, you can't.
And what's the difference between 1.3 and 1.5 if you're doing a full renovation? Like the difference is almost immaterial at that point.
Correct. And so it's ultimately they landed on, and I'm not in a position to, I don't really have a strong opinion on it, other than I do think some people will be disappointed that it's not more comprehensive. Ultimately, right. That $700 million does not get you what you think it gets you.
Yeah. And I think some people will love the fact that it won't look any different, like the familiarity and the ambiance, whether it has any or not. It has a distinct feel when you walk into Beaver Stadium. We'll see what happens when you put in a luxury suite and you take out some capacity, which is a part of the plan. But it, like you said, it likely won't change all that much.
To Paul's comment in the comments, yes, escalators, elevators, ramps. There will be. They call it vertical transportation in the document, the proposal document. But yes,
ADA compliant, trying to get everything to be compliant with modern regulations and standards, right?
I mean, think about how we enter the state, right? We come through the media gate, and there are fans that also come in through that gate.
Yeah.
To ride an elevator that fits maybe 15 people. There's 2 elevators behind the west stands. Maybe each fit 15 people. There's no other way to get up there. If you're way up high in the west stands, you have 2 choices. You can either do the stands, like you could walk the stands, or you could take that elevator. I mean, there's just not a lot of good ways to get up in the stadium, and I think that that's one of the things that's going to be addressed.
Active chat today. People are engaged
Love
with
it.
Beaver Stadium Renovation.
Love it.
Hey, Nate. Kevin is here to say something. So you can't put it on either of us. Kevin says Beaver Stadium is a charming dump. This renovation way overdue. So Nate and I didn't say this. This is not an opinion of the show. This is opinion from Kevin in the chat, who gave us a super chat. Appreciate his thoughts and his opinions here. But this time around, if people are getting mad in the comments on replay on the YouTube channel, first off, appreciate your engagement, but you can tell Kevin how you feel instead of me or Nate. Brandon says he's worked in construction for years since high school. Maintenance work is expensive, especially been neglected over the years. People don't realize how important maintenance work is. So these are all the things coming in to this big old project that we have to take into consideration as well. I hate this part because this is when I want to do a thing or purchase something for my house. It's the added costs, right? And I always ignore the added costs, and then I realize, oh, the deal I got is not the deal I thought I got. So Brandon, keeping that front of mind for everybody.
Do the next one too, because this is the CARM 92. This is the response. This is the thing that people are going to resent. They're going to be disappointed because their section will have not been improved. And really, it's even the bent of why this is being done, how this has been prioritized is going to be a little controversial. It is a luxury focused improvement because it is the untapped area of the stadium to create revenue, right? It just, you're missing out. Like it's almost like lost dollars that you could be making, but you don't, because you don't have those facilities. Now you're going to sell those facilities and you're going to have this opportunity to raise more funds that ultimately may open the door to bigger and other renovations of things that need to be touched throughout the rest of the stadium, the east side, all of those different sections. But on the front end of it, it's, hey, we're going to invest a decent chunk of change, a really high chunk of change to ensure that there are luxury suites and to ensure that there are premium chairback seats for, which again, it's understanding the demographic, are you going to sell those season tickets at a higher price point to a different demographic than the rest of the stadium? I don't know. I mean, but certainly there's research that I think Penn State feels confident that that's something that can be done and essentially something that has to be done. Otherwise, none of the other stuff is possible.
Yeah, you got to get through this hard part to get to the part where maybe things get a little bit easier, it sounds. We're going to take a quick break from the talk on the stadium to talk about our sponsor of today's show, and that is RogueShop.com. RogueShop.com is a premium cannabis dispensary in Wisconsin. They have been a sponsor here on the show for quite a while now. They are one of the longest tenured sponsors on the BWI Live show. We appreciate them so much for what they do, not just for the show, but also for us individually. I know that, for me, I never used cannabis in my life, never smoked, never had any edibles or anything like that. So I came into this whole thing a little bit like, what do we do here? Am I allowed to be when something's like you're an adult for the first time, you're like, am I allowed to be doing this? And now it's legal and you're like, you're allowed to be doing this. So I had to be walked through the whole process is what I'm trying to say. I didn't know anything about anything. And Shar and Richard, Mr. Rogue, over, if you want to talk to him at the Blue White Illustrated message board, he is a member of the message board, so he can talk you through stuff like this. He puts up promotions on the site as well when he has a 420 promotion or an Easter promotion or Christmas promotion. Whatever they got, they let you know over at Blue White Illustrated on the Lion's Den message forum. But what they are, holistic type of small business. They want to help you with your issues in your life that, you supplement Western medicine. So you have chronic pain, find out the source of the chronic pain. But while you're going through that, they can help with pain management, inflammation. If you have a hard time sleeping, they have tinctures, oils, massage oils, and more, all these things in different ways to ingest CBD and THC. I've taken the gummies before. You need to take them like medicine. You can't just play around with them. I made a mistake like that once, and it was an interesting evening. It just like any other medicine, you got to respect it. So they give you instructions on how to take stuff and what the best outcome is for you to help dial in your dosage. But the best part here that I just put away and I'll come back up to, Blue White Illustrated. Use the promo code BWI for 10% off at rogueshop.com. Tell them T-Frank sent you, and you'll help. You'll find a way to live a better, more stress-free, easy life with rogueshop.com. Nate, the broader context of these, what?
Nothing. I just love it. I love the transition.
You love my expert transition?
Yeah.
Because I didn't know if we were done. Were we done with the conversation on the stadium? Was there anything more to dig there?
We didn't even talk about the rest of the schedule. That MRob makes a great point about the tentative deadlines. This is what they're shooting for. They're shooting for this to be ready in 5 years, right? So 5 seasons from now, ahead of the 5th season, for the 2027 season, they want construction to be done. So that, like, it's just, people want designs, and people have asked me for drawings and different, like, they're not remotely close to that. They have some ideas. There are things that they'd like to implement, but really this design start date for June 2023, when they select somebody, is when that process is actually going to start. And then, as you see, pre-construction, there's so much, again, unsexy stuff, wires, it's stuff that I'm just gonna sound foolish to even talk about it, but
I love that you just say wires and I don't know what you're talking about.
Well, it's all of that stuff that you see by the side of the road. It's like PVC piping looking stuff, right? You're just like, what do you do with that stuff? Like, what is that? That's all the stuff that is going to also happen and will be put into place, and they're going to get that process started.
So, and to what you said earlier about MRob saying, as a Fed contractor official, those deadlines are tentative. I wouldn't be surprised if the project of this size and scope misses deadline after deadline. That's a great point. And let me ask you another question. Maybe MRob can answer this. Maybe we can have this conversation here. I don't always bring in my love of the Buffalo Bills, but I do when it's relevant. And the Bills are building a new stadium. They're building a brand new stadium from the ground up. Its completion date is 2026, and they're starting. So why is Penn State's timeline so much longer? Is it literally just money? Like, if you can pay to have things happen on a priority schedule, or is there some other reason? Is it renovation? Why is this timeline 5 years and a brand new $1.5 billion stadium is going up much quicker? Like, it's supposed to be done a year before this one is completed, and they're starting construction in 2025 according to our schedule. So what's my April 2023 is the construction start date, is it? So it's supposed to have started already, and June is when the major construction starts.
But there would have been a design process for that started years earlier, or at least 12. I mean, right. And not to mention the fact that you're dealing with, there's all kinds of webs to weave on this, right? Is the state going to be involved? Bottom line, are state funds going to be appropriated towards this? Maybe, right? Certainly, that's something that Penn State hopes it comes to fruition, because they see it as an asset, not just to Penn State University, but to certainly the state college community and the state as a whole, right? You have this facility that brings most of the state together, or a large chunk of the state together. So that's a part of it. And then there's again, bureaucracy, right? You just have all of these steps, things that have to be cleared. It's not as simple or as straightforward as a private owner, Terry Gula, deciding, hey, this is something that we're going to do, and we're ramming it through with or without the help of New York State. So I think that, to be honest, I think 5 years is probably the expedited version of this.
Gotcha. Steven asks, how is this going to help in the winter and the new playoff format, which is coming, I think, in 2024? So does this provide benefits there as well? Maybe an additional home game if you get that?
Yes. So this, the winterization stuff is part of the initial $70 million. So $29 million, I believe, I think I have that right, is toward winterization right off the bat. It's getting it to a place where if they had to host a playoff game in December, they could do that. I mean, there's it's funny because it sounds hyperbolic that you're really just overplaying your hand a little bit, but it's not. I just, all of the feedback and the input that I get, everything that I'm saying here is reflected in conversations that I'm having. It was there in the meeting itself, the Board of Trustees meeting. These are like fundamental shortcomings of the stadium as it presently exists. It wasn't designed for this type of usage, the things that are modern at this point, and what they'd like to do moving forward. I mean, refrigeration, things that you don't think about, concession stands, not just concession stands of, hey, how easy is it for me to get my hot dog? It's, hey, can we cook the hot dogs? Do we have a mechanism, right? Like, oh, you want expanded food offerings? They can't cook it there. They don't have the space. There's no kitchen space. All of this behind the house stuff has to be addressed, and they're finally doing it.
Steel built in the 1930s before the great invention of refrigeration.
It's wild.
Marvel of modern industrial context and blah blah blah.
They spent like
terrible.
They spent about $7 million on freezers recently, like within the last couple of years. That's what it costs. That's what it costs to have that. You want a freezer? There it is. So anyway, moving on.
Yeah, I do want to get to a couple of other things on the show today because it's not just Beaver Stadium. Like, we can still have the conversation throughout the show about Beaver Stadium. You got more questions, you can throw them in the chat, but that's not, folks, that's not all. Here's the list of things that they're doing with Pat Kraft's leadership right now. Greenberg Indoor Sports Center training table, Jeffrey Field Soccer Complex, Penn State East Area locker room renovations, Lasch building renovation phase 2, and the Penn State Indoor Air practice bubble. So for all of you that are listening on the podcast version, there's a long list of things on the screen right now that they're also trying to do in conjunction with this. So can you break down what all of that means?
Yes.
Start with, and I think I'm most interested in, the Greenberg Indoor Training Table. Is this basically a dining commons just for athletes?
Correct. And so you have better control over the food. I believe there will be other facilities there to go along with that dining commons, but it is okay. The food will be served in-house now, but it is meant to serve all of Penn State student athletes. So if you're housed in East Area locker, but I don't want to be disingenuous about this. This is about football. This is about football having its dining commons in its building. So yes, it will serve the other sports. There will be opportunities for the other sports to also feed their student athletes, but it is a massive win for Penn State football to be able to say, hey, yes, all of this stuff is in one spot. So if you're a Penn State football player, you're one-stop shopping. You don't have to go over to Pollock Dining Commons. You don't have to go all over the place to get your food. And more important, I think, is the element of, hey, these are college kids. They eat unhealthy all the time. They eat what's most convenient. Their schedules are so packed that it doesn't create time for that. Nutrition is so far advanced, right? We know things now about what you're eating. They can tailor make a diet plan and the food for every single player and provide that to them 3 meals a day, 4 meals, right? Snacks, all that other stuff. So it's a massive, massive win for Penn State football to have that project. And that's something that I think is the construction and completion date for that is 2025. I want to say it should be open by 2025. So they're going to move pretty quickly on that one.
Yeah, and again, that's the science of athleticism and athletics that we talk about that has advanced where you know so much more about how to program and how to hack the human metabolism. Yep. So this is the other half of the stuff that I love. That my wife is a personal trainer, and we have these conversations about eating and timing of when you get your protein and how it affects your sleep as well. All of these things are interconnected, and just because you have the information doesn't mean you have the implementation. And this is a huge recruiting thing. Yep. Because if you want to be the very best of the best, you've got to have access to all of these things in order to advance your own physiological gains. I mean, it's all about the ability to perform on the field. And these are the tendrils. These are the things that go out from that. It's not just about what happens between the lines. It's how you prepare everything in your life for that moment, which is why football is so intense, because it's like total tangent here. We were watching CrossFit one time on ESPN, and my wife used to be really big into CrossFit. And I said, oh, this is what football players do before they actually learn the skill to actually play a game. So you've got to be an expert in nutrition, sleep, science, athleticism, lifting, and then your position to be good at football. And making that as easy as possible is the goal of all of that. And I think it's just to go on a long tangent about it, like that, I want to underscore how important nutrition is in this conversation.
Michael's comment there about total development is just, it sums it up perfectly. The front facing argument, and really, I think the only thing that matters is, okay, you're investing $80 to $100 million a year in football, right? It's this massive operation. It funds everything. It is the total engine of Penn State sports and economics in a lot of ways, and including this area. Why are you going to not do everything that you possibly can do to maximize performance?
Yeah.
And that is all encompassing. It's yes, we're talking about food right now, but people made fun of me and took issue with bringing up single occupancy dorm rooms. It's a huge deal. It is one of all of these pieces of why are you going to skimp on having players get a good night's rest because they're not sleeping next to a teammate who snores?
And also, something that I never thought of because I am 5'9.5", I fit in the beds. Like, correct. These athletes are 6'6". They need an actual different bed than what the university students sleep on, the standard issue ones. That's correct. Another thing, like for especially basketball, that we don't ever consider. But in your daily life, if your ankles don't fit on your bed, that's a problem. Especially for freshmen and people that are living on campus for the first couple years.
Yep. Just ensuring that you're doing, and it's not about whether or not it's extravagant. It's not. If you look on the return on investment, you should say to yourself, okay, is it a reasonable expense to make sure that the mattresses that we use are conducive to better sleep? There's a science to that. They can figure that stuff out.
Dak Prescott tells me every Sunday during the NFL season about his sleep number bed. I mean, it's a science. Everything's a science.
I don't know what brand it is. I don't know how. There are experts for all of that stuff. I would just say, yes, this is what has been talked about throughout, that I think is starting to connect. I think that it's starting to resonate with the broader public of, hey, this is what has to be done. And this nutrition center is a big part of that. And Pat Kraft especially understands that.
I can't afford a $10,000 bed like Dak Prescott. So what I do is occasionally I take a Rogue Shop Delta Gummy and then I fall asleep.
There you go.
So there you go. The next thing I think that's interesting that we should bring up here is the indoor practice bubble, the air bubble. This is not only fascinating, but also another huge thread of Penn State football taking an advance, even though they won't be using the practice bubble. So explain the bubble to us.
So I'm going to explain the bubble by explaining Haluba Hall. And
my favorite place.
My explanation of Haluba Hall is that it is a packed building in the winter months. It is constantly used. It's constantly occupied, not just by Penn State football. And that is problematic. It is. You want to be able to provide the facilities to play football, 7-on-7, whatever the climate is, whatever's going on outside. You want to be able to ensure that your Penn State football players have access to an indoor football complex, the fields that it's there. I remember a few years ago, after a Penn State pro day, everyone was kind of hurried out of the building because softball had practice, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. Softball needs a place to practice. Softball needs a facility that it can train indoors. But that was a little bit of an eye opener in terms of, hey, lacrosse is using this, rugby uses this, golf, right? There's golf, and it's funny when you and I go to a press conference, even in season, you look around and every once in a while you see a stray baseball. Yeah. Or you see a stray, whatever, lacrosse ball. You just see this different sports equipment, which again is okay, but for a university of this size, for an athletic department of this size, when you have 31 sports to accommodate, you need at least 2 indoor practice facilities, and this creates that opportunity. So it's not like, this is again a win for Penn State football by creating a second indoor for the inclement months, for the basically the winter, because it will come down in the summer. They don't intend to keep it up year round. It provides that second space so that football can become, or Haluba Hall, I should say, can become a football exclusive building. Again, huge win for Penn State football to have this project in particular with that nutrition facility in the works and starting to get going.
So the couple other things, I think we've talked, and Pat Kraft has made very clear that Jeffrey Field needs to have a locker room, and they need to build out that facility, plumbing. We don't need to get into all of the things here on the list, but the expansive list that we just gave you on top of the Beaver Stadium renovations. How is all of this fitting into the budget? If you don't have the money to do the full renovation of the stadium, how is this working, and how is this a part of the bigger picture?
I don't know, and I don't care.
But how much is it costing? That's all I wanted. I wanted to get out of you.
It's going to cost $160 million to do. So $160 million includes $70 million for the first phase of Beaver Stadium. So this is just, again, the very first baby steps of a $700 million project. So the first ask of that was for $70 million, which leaves $90 million for these 6 or 5 other projects, including $22 million for the second level of the Lasch building, which is just, I walked through it yesterday. It's outdated. It hasn't been touched. These offices, the coaches need new spaces. They need better, more collaborative spaces. Again, that was something that was talked about in the Board of Trustees meeting. It's just not conducive to today's college football. And so this is a building that was at one point state of the art, and not a lot has been done to it. It was fascinating, and not something that I didn't know, but was just interesting to hear someone say it. A big part of the $22 million that they're intending to spend on this second floor renovation is going to go to HVAC.
Just to be able to be in the building.
To improve air circulation, because it hasn't been touched in 30 years. They haven't changed the thermostats, and right. So you've got all of these underlying things that have just had been ignored or kicked down the road a little bit, and it's catching up. And now they're saying, okay, well, this isn't a pleasant pill necessarily, but it's one that you have to take. And I cannot stress this enough. Everything's going to cost more 10 years from now.
Yeah.
And today is the environment to demonstrate that, because 10 years ago, if most of the stuff had been addressed on the front end, they wouldn't be facing a lot of these costs, a lot of the things that they're seeing right now. So it's about allocating money, and you've got people who are paid much higher than I am to figure that stuff out. And so that's the responsibility that they have right now moving forward, how to pay for it and how to allocate it.
As always, we get into having a great conversation. Time gets away from us. We got a couple of topics we need to get to before the end of the show, and we obviously have to get to the mailbag. So if you've got questions, Beaver Stadium renovations or not, whatever's on your mind, the mailbag show at the end of the BWI Live is always for you, people that are watching here on the show, and of course, from the Lions Den message forum. So we got to get to that. But let's talk about the man of the hour. We've been talking about all these plans, and the guy pushing all of this and, kind of creating this master plan is Pat Kraft, and Penn State's new athletic director. Not a year into the job yet, but, significantly through that first year, he had a very positive, and I don't want to say bold, but cocky, confident outlook that Penn State could compete in 31 sports, be successful in football and basketball, pour resources in there, and still be competitive in everything. Keep the model the way it is. Do you think that so far he's delivering on that?
Yes, I think it's early, right? We're not going to know how successful some of these projects are for years. I mean, it's just interesting, because ultimately I see it as who can win support. And I think Sandy Barber is a very smart woman. I think she gets all of it. I think she understands all of these different elements of how to make things work. She understands college athletics. I don't think if there was a failing, if there was a shortcoming, it was her ability, I think, to get people on board with the vision, to get people to understand what it takes to be enthusiastic about it, to say, hey, like, guys, this is critical. This stuff needs to be done. Do we want to compete? Do we want to be successful? How successful do we want to be? If you're okay with just, there's a line and we're not willing to cross it, and that line comes well short of what everybody else is doing in the marketplace, that's your ceiling. You're not gonna do better than that. I think that over the last 10 years, and certainly before that, a bit of a culture was established at Penn State of, hey, we don't have to do it the way that everybody else does it. We're going to do it responsibly and effectively, and
with the sheer force of character.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
And the weird thing is, Nate, it's worked. Like, for football, they've been in the top 10 for the last 6 years. It's routinely in the top 10 to top 15.
It is all about perception, right? Because if you're on the inside, if you're James Franklin, if you're his staff, if you're people in that building, and you know what's going on outside, you're saying right now, we've outperformed resources. We've outperformed the standard that you see from everyone else. And so I think that now with Pat Kraft, like, kind of looping this back around with Pat Kraft, he's saying the same stuff. It's that people are starting to buy in. People believe him more, or whatever it is. And that's right. I mean, I'm not in a position to say, oh, well, he's more effective about it, or why people are coming around to these notions. Maybe it's like gun against the head time of, oh man, we're staring this in the face of losing relevancy or losing the ability to compete. And his messaging for that is getting across more clearly. I don't know, but I would just say that that's what's going on right now, is for all of the hand wringing of Sandy Barber was fiscally irresponsible at Cal. That was kind of
I remember
got hung
that
around her neck for really like for things that were beyond her control. Pat Kraft just proposed
close to $1 billion, right? So
Yeah,
700 million plus everything else here.
Basically $800 million in projects, right? Like hey, but also it's needed. We know this. We can look across the landscape of college athletics and see what's needed and what's not. And this is needed. This is stuff that's needed for Penn State athletics. He's proposed it, and at least on the front end, he just got $160 million approved and moved through from the Board of Trustees.
Rob, I think, nutshells it well. It's the ability to sell and monetize that political capital. And the political part of that, there are probably 6 or 7 shows deep of political intrigue that, we won't be getting to here on the show, but are absolutely for real in what happened at Penn State over the last decade. So I just think it is noticeable. It is noticeable that he gets hired. He says these things at the start of his press conference, and then here we are in May of the next year, not 12 months removed, and there are things happening. Yep. We talk a lot. Like, obviously on the show, we talk a lot, but things actually happening, that's something different, when people talk versus what they do.
I have to point this out because it was so striking. But there were comments during the Board of Trustees meeting that Brandon Short actually responded to about why didn't we do this sooner? Like, thank you for finally moving on this. To Pat Kraft, thank you for finally moving on this. And Brandon Short spoke up and he said, hey, Sandy wanted to do this stuff. Sandy would have liked to have done these things, but knew that she didn't have the support. And so it wasn't even brought up in a meeting because those things would have been shot down. So, look, it costs so much more to do this now than it did 5 years ago, than it did 10 years ago. Penn State, if a lesson is learned or if a lesson is being enacted right now, is, hey, if you don't do this stuff, it's not saving you money.
Right.
You want to be prudent. You want to make sure that you're spending it in the right ways, that you're not blowing this money on nothing. Absolutely. But also, if you can recognize that these are essential and critical to your ability to perform and to compete in this space, you got to do it. And the sooner you do it, actually, the more fiscally responsible it is. Truly.
Are you good hanging out for a little bit longer because we got to get to the mailbag and there's a couple other things I want to get
I'm
to.
all yours, buddy. I'm all yours. I owe you this.
Here are we got about a show and a half of stuff to get through, and I tend to pack stuff in on the rundown, but I want to also make sure that we're not going too long for everybody. But here's the other part of this that came out this week are game times and game themes, and really what this is all about is September 23rd versus Iowa is the whiteout and not November 11th against Michigan. West Virginia, the helmet stripe game, if that's interesting to you. Spirit Day, the stripe out, the white out, the helmet stripe game, all these different game themes. But West Virginia and Iowa primetime games, Iowa, the whiteout game. This is something I asked, we talked about on the show when this first came out, and I gave my opinion of, I think it's worth the trade that you don't have Michigan whiteout for the fact that you are a part of the Big Noon Kick, which is the prime slot. You are a relevant franchise in the television market. They want eyeballs on your program, which increases your relevance year over year, even if it's just keeping pace with the rest of college football. Because if you weren't in that slot, you would be backsliding out of the top 3 in the Big Ten. Yep. So do you agree with that? Is that worth the trade-off of not having the primetime whiteout against your top team on the schedule? And does that matter to you in the long run of all these TV decisions versus the tradition and the pageantry of it all?
I wouldn't I wouldn't say that I feel strongly necessarily about any of it, other than I do have an inclination towards making the whiteout annually a game that you can win. I do, like, I don't think it's as or feel good about winning, something that can differentiate and yes, in the past, you have had Ohio State and Michigan traditionally be these whiteout games just about every year.
Yeah.
The Fox contract changed that. Okay. Is a whiteout as effective as a day game, which it likely is going to be for either one of those games every other year? I don't think so. I don't think it's the same thing.
Yeah.
I think that
Agreed.
the spectacle of the whiteout game is best served as a night game. And it's the most photogenic. It looks awesome. It's super cool. And you're already juiced up for Ohio State and Michigan. Like there's everyone is coming to that game. You've got a sold out crowd. All of that stuff is already there for you. That if you change the perception a little bit and say, okay, we can attach this to a game that might not be the hardest home game on the schedule, but it's just a tier a little bit below that. I think it works. I works. I don't have any issue with Penn State just clobbering Minnesota for a night game last year. Like I thought that was good for Penn State. If Iowa, who has given Penn State fits at times in this series over the last 10 years, if this is the differentiator and you have it for an 8:00 game, do it.
Yeah.
Great idea. I have no issue with that at all.
Yeah. I agree. I think that you have the built-in juice for that game. And the only downside I would say is that the amplification factor, and I'm looking at this not as a on the field win-loss thing. I'm looking at this as relevancy and the spectacle. And nothing creates a bigger spectacle than the biggest spectacle, which is your top opponent, primetime, whiteout. That is like the three tiers of something that can create the 2016 game against Ohio State. This memorable game. But, as you pointed out, how many times are you doing that anyway? How many times are you winning that game and it looks the way it's supposed to in whiteout, primetime, all that stuff? It hasn't happened frequently.
You're not going to get that game, though, in an 8:00 time spot. It's not going to happen anymore. That's it. Like, I'd love to maybe Fox will change their mind. They're not going to. They've decided on this. This is the way it's going to be for the next 5-6 years.
So then the other two things that came out, the primetime game, West Virginia 7:30, Iowa, that is an 8 p.m. game. West Virginia, the helmet stripe game, which as somebody pointed out to me this week, is basically just a whiteout with a blue stripe. So you sneak it in 2 whiteout games.
And you took a look at West Virginia. You have some early thoughts on the Mountaineers.
Yeah, I thought it would just be fun with the announcement of West Virginia and the themes of the game to give you an idea. Hey, what kind of team are they playing? So I went through their offense and I looked at kind of the architecture of it, is the way I like to say it. Like, what are they trying to build every game? What is their offensive style? What are the unique features in it within kind of these general subsets of what type of offense and what type of running game and passing game? And it was just an interesting preliminary advanced scouting sort of thing on the Mountaineers. And my major takeaway is they are a boilerplate spread offense. There is not a whole lot interesting or unique about what they do.
So who you got?
So I haven't really gone into the player part of that yet, because obviously players can make any scheme great.
Sure.
But I would say Penn State. Like here's the thing. Some of the stuff, and you can read all this at BlueIllustrated.com. If you are running a spread offense and you're using heavy amounts of screening, like you're throwing wide receiver bubble screens and stuff like that, it means that your running game isn't very good, because the spread offense is supposed to help with that, help with your traditional running game. If you are then throwing additional screens on top of that, it means you're not getting what you need between the trenches, because spreading out the field, literally the spread offense, 3 receivers, sometimes 4 receivers going 10 personnel and running the football, is supposed to lighten the box load and help you run efficiently without having dominant players. And then from a passing perspective, some of the newer augmentations off of this even further de-emphasize the quarterback. Think about Penn State in 2021 and how many bubble screens they threw to Jahan Dotson. Why were they throwing so many bubble screens, Nate?
Because they couldn't run the ball.
Because they couldn't run the football, so they needed to find a different way to spread the field out. And West
Nailed
Virginia,
it.
West Virginia likes to run this, I call it the stop and go, where you're running short routes or you're going deep. Like that's their vertical passing game and then the underneath stuff. And that's kind of it. So from a perspective there, it's basically just, I don't want to say paint by numbers like it's anyone can do it, but that's kind of the idea. Is it's supposed to de-emphasize talent and emphasize the scheme. And when I see that, like, that tells me something, context clues about the level of talent on the team. And Penn State clearly on defense has a extreme level of talent, and they face teams like this on a regular basis. So we'll get into the players and how they make all these things work later, but that's kind of the basic tenets of what they are. Spread offense. The most unique thing is they like to run outside zone. Like they are a pure inside-outside zone team for the most part. They do run some other stuff in there. You can't be pure like 100%, but they use outside zone, I think, more than some of the spread teams you've seen over the years, where it's all kind of inside the tackles, and then the outside running is just the quarterback on the option. So that's kind of a overview of the interesting parts of what they are. We do have to get to the mailbag, because I want to make sure we get to people's thoughts on the show, and I don't want to keep everyone here all day long, even though I'm thoroughly enjoying the show. So let's get to the other side of Pat Kraft's job, which we didn't touch on in the first half of this show, or the first 75 to 95% of the show. This comes from Penn State 2012. Nate, you are the NIL expert here at Blue White Illustrated. Any updates or improvements on the NIL front? Like, a lot of information and resources and time has been devoted to the other side. I'm sure BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, you're going to get the inside scoop from Nate. You got to pay for that, $29.99 for 6 months. Great deal right now. But can you hint at, or is there any nugget of NIL that you've found recently you could share with us here on the show?
They're working on it. They're out. They're engaging right now. There was actually just an event in New York City, not last night, 2 nights ago, Monday night. So, yeah, the updates or improvements, steady improvement, not leaps. Things are happening behind the scenes, I think, to, consolidate a little bit to get a more streamlined look of what they're doing on the NIL front. But I'm glad that the question is there, because that is the second piece.
Yeah,
it is. You're just responding to different eras of the college football landscape. And right now in college athletics, the facilities race, that was a huge race and was a huge thing, I'm not saying it's over, but it's shifted. And so now Penn State's wrapping up the loose ends of projects that need to get done to compete on the facilities front. But if the piece of NIL is not there, it's going to be the same deal. It's the exact same conversation, just about NIL. So improvements, yes. Where it needs to be, no, not close. Honestly, not close.
So let me ask you this question here in the chat. I think this is a great follow-up. Brian asked this early in the show. Where does Penn State facilities for football rank nationally? I think we know that they are not highly ranked, but where would you say they would rank at the end of this? And does the stadium really even involve football facilities?
Stadium's not relevant. We won't, that's not, it's what do they use 365 days a year? So if you're asking that, what are the facilities that they're in 365 days a year? You're talking about Haluba, Lasch, and now Greenberg. Getting there. Are they there? No. And it's not hard, guys. Just type in Google, Kansas State facility renovation, Auburn facility renovation, Wake Forest facility renovation. They're all over the place. It's like Xander just said, Oregon. Yeah, Oregon is crazy and sexy, and it's a spaceship, right? Like all of that stuff. That's fine. You have the flashiest stuff. I think the thing that gets lost sight of when it's like, oh, well, how much can Penn State possibly need? It doesn't need to be a spaceship. It doesn't have to be top 5, but you got to put yourself in the top 20.
Yeah.
And they're not. They're making progress towards it. The weight room expansion and all the things that they did there. That's a great project. That's a maximized project that cost more than it would have if they had done it earlier, but something that they got done. Haluba Hall needs a lot of work. Honestly, it does. Lasch second floor needs a lot of work and is something that is being addressed right now and will be addressed, shortly. But yeah, it's not. I'm not gonna like I can't sit here and say, oh well, I'd put Penn State at 45th. I don't have that much of a perspective of what the rest of the college football landscape looks like. I just have enough to say, could I tick off 15 to 20 that have been recently done and appear to be finished and better than what Penn State even has on tap? Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So, make of that what you will, but as it gets done, as the weight room is done, as the quarterback lab got done, as Greenberg gets done, second floor, like as all that stuff gets done, it's going to bump Penn State up and up and up and up and up. So as long as they end up in that top 15, top 20, I think you can feel comfortable with that, but you have to do that. And now they're finally making steps in that direction.
And I think you made a good point of it doesn't have to be a spaceship, but it has to cover all of the needs of the athlete and be respectable. And if you do that, Penn State's, as we said, Penn State is a top 15 team annually. So that should certainly help boost them in any functional capacity to being relevant every year and competitive every year in recruiting.
I'm going to say the same thing that I always say, which is if you don't have a shovel in the ground, you're doing it wrong.
That is a lot. I will admit, like, that feels like a lot, but you're right. Basketball. Let's talk about some basketball. Nate, how soon will we get a sense of the new basketball coaching staff, if they're making progress and steps with the 2024 recruits, or if there's any 2023 left, and are there any 2023 leftover recruits that they're pursuing? Leftover sounds harsh, but like guys that haven't committed already.
Yes. So there is a prospect from Iceland who I will not try to pronounce his name, but I reported this last week. He is on campus, should be leaving actually this morning. He's a guy who would be class of 2023. They missed on a few. Brady Dunlap was a guy who ended up going to St. John's, I believe. Blue Kane ended up at Georgia. So there have been some 2023 guys that they were involved with, but didn't end up landing. But this Iceland kid is a guy who I think they feel somewhat optimistic about being able to convince to play at Penn State. But for the most part, look, this is the end. This is the end of the process. They've got 10 filled. They need 3 more. It's, you're just trying to complete this process, and you never know. There's always stuff that happens where somebody enters late or somebody gets backs out, whatever the situation is. There's always things that open up sometimes, but for the most part, I think that 2023 for the most part is finished. They're going to try to get this kid and then go from there. I know that they have a couple of visits, or at least one visit, maybe 2 lined up after the dead period. Mike Rhodes said that on the John Rothstein podcast on Monday. Did not say who, and I don't have that yet. So stay tuned, stick with me. But I'll get you guys some names in short order.
That's always a value add, not a value add. That's a core value of why you're signing up for BlueWhiteIllustrated.com. CJ Ruger asks, will we sign a QB in this class? Yes, I think that Penn State will definitely sign a quarterback every single year in recruiting. But more specifically to your question here, CJ, is that I think I said this on the show the other day, that I feel like this group of quarterbacks that have emerged here in the spring after this spring evaluation period, having seen them, and I haven't done the full evaluation of their film, I do feel like these are quality prospects, and it feels like the offensive tackle board where Penn State is in on enough guys that are quality, that I think are future starters and high quality potential contributors in the future, that they're going to get a guy in the class. And some of these guys, I think, are closer to Aller in talent level of like physical ability and arm strength than they are the other guys on the roster. So that is a really good sign that they're talking to players that have that level of talent and that they showed up and they were interested at this point. There's late bloomers that happen in every recruiting cycle. So when you get into the 3 stars of like, why was he not a 5-star? And look at the recruiting process. The recruiting process starts in like 9th grade. And some guys don't hit 6'3" until they're juniors, or maybe they didn't start until they were later in their career. So I think there are guys in this class that are, you know, the Elite 11 passing camp is coming to Penn State this weekend to State College. That is a huge win. They're going to be able to talk to guys, see guys in person, and maybe even get them on campus for unofficials, things like that. I think it's a huge benefit that they're able to do that this spring, and they found guys already that are interested in the program. I'll do one more quickly for me because we talked about this yesterday on the breaking news about Adavian Collins. Dark Horse Tuesdays, great name on the message board. Is there a big advantage to taking a guy like Collins out of the portal that spent a year in a different program, albeit not playing, over another 24 prospect that the staff really likes, aside from the obvious spending 2 years in college already? DB seems like a position they haven't been afraid to put guys very young out on the field. Seems like it was purely a depth move by Franklin and not a guy they would have traditionally targeted. Early on in the portal, Penn State was comfortable targeting guys that they had already recruited, and Adavian Collins, there was no threads connecting the two of them previously. This is something I brought up at the end of the show, the end of the breaking news video yesterday, that I think is pretty important. He's used his red shirt. He has 4 years of eligibility. Now, you don't have to use Elliott Washington on special teams unless he's the best option and you think that's the best option for the program. So that is a side benefit of bringing in a guy that you think can play at Penn State. Like, full stop, Penn State thinks he can play at Penn State, or else they would not have recruited him. I haven't done a full deep dive into his high school film as a guy that's in the 2022 class. If you remember, Penn State only got Cam Miller in that class. So they missed on corner. This is kind of a do-over where, hey, we just got a 2022 corner, and that sets up a little bit better in terms of eligibility, depth, and the layering of the roster. All of those are reasons why you wouldn't just take another 24 guy who isn't going to be here until later. So I think it's a good, smart move for the future after their short-term play in Storm Duck didn't work out. They had both needs on the roster. They needed more cornerbacks of the future. They needed another corner to play this year. Well, Cam Miller apparently is going to fill the this year portion of that, and they still needed a guy for the future. So that's why they took Adavian Collins, in my opinion. You can check out the full conversation with Greg and I, which happened yesterday. I'll put a link here in the video as well. Okay, this is purely for you, Nate. I have no idea, and it's even addressed to you. Nate, what's going on with special teams, and how concerned are you with punter and kicker for this fall?
You know, I'm gonna punt on this one. No, we have interviews lined up for a lot of people over the next 2 or 3 weeks, and Stacey Collins will be one of them. So to sit here and try to tell you something that I don't feel real strongly about, I prefer not to.
Okay.
It'd just be better to circle back. So I mean, if you want to ask in June sometime, I think that at that point I will have had a better conversation with him, can hear it straight from his mouth. I mean, I would say that through the end of spring practice, one of the themes was just exactly what you expect, right? It's the younger guys may have a little bit more talent. They're just less consistent. The guys that they brought in through the portal have a little less talent, but they are more consistent. So you're weighing that. You're trying to find that out. And yeah, we'll see. It should be
the hope is that those veteran guys are more consistent enough that they're productive at the position, right? That you're not trading off less talent for marginal consistency. I would say.
I mean, I think what you would hope is that the guys who have the most talent find that consistency.
Right. But if they don't,
right?
like if that's what if you're weighing those two options.
But you have a backstop. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Let's make this the last question. It's for both of us, and I think that maybe you won't like this question either, but I think this will be a good one to end on. CJ Philly says, imagine this is the deepest team in terms of top to bottom talent since the late 2000s. Which position group do you think will surprise us positively? And on the flip side, which do you think might disappoint slightly next season? I'm going to throw this out here. Quarterback might disappoint you because the position is hard and there's going to be growing pains. We think we know what Drew Aller is going to be, but we don't know that yet. I would like to see what he's good at, where he, what the little snippets of, okay, maybe that isn't the thing I'm excited to see him do in terms of maybe his footwork times under pressure. It gets a little wobbly. Is that a consistent problem or is it not a consistent problem? We don't know yet, but just based on percentages, to me, that's the position where Penn State fans have the easiest cliff to fall off of in terms of being disappointed because he's not the guy that is going to turn into Trevor Lawrence in his first season. So that's kind of my opening salvo on that question. Do you have a positive one that you would say maybe it will be a little bit better than you expect?
Quarterback, but I already have. I think I have realistic expectations. I don't think they're diminished. I just think I think it's very obvious what's like going to happen this year, right? Is you need Drew Aller and his wide receivers who don't have an established like star. Can Keandre be that? I think he can. Mm-hmm. But has he been that in the past? He hasn't really had that opportunity. So it's big. It's like there are unknowns there in the passing game that I think defenses are rightfully going to test. Right. So any team that has that feels confident in its pass defense going in man coverage, I think is going to create challenges for Penn State's running game. Like that to me is okay. You saw what Singleton and Katron did last year. Like they're good. They are good, legit good. What happens when there's 9 guys who, right? When they don't have numbers, when there's not, when teams are just going to say, hey, you are not going to beat us. Like Nick, you're not going to run for an 80-yard touchdown on us. It's not going to happen. We're going to do everything in our power to make sure that doesn't happen. I think there are going to be some tough games ahead. You already saw it. They already had some of those games last season when that same thing happened.
Illinois, I believe, is returning a top 5 defensive line in the country, according to multiple outlets. I mean, that's I'm circling that as like that's a bigger game than you might imagine.
Totally. I'm a firm believer, not in Illinois being like awesome, but in this just goes. I mean, I'm never going to let this go. In the 21 Illinois loss not being a bad loss, like not being the tragic loss that it was made out to be. That was an okay Illinois team that did the one thing, and Brett Bielema will continue to do this. Right. They are going to give some teams fits, and if you don't have the elixir, the answer to what they do to you defensively, you're going to be in trouble.
Yeah. So Michigan was a college football playoff team, and they struggled to beat them. I think that might have been at home too, where that's just going to be a team that's a tough out. We'll see about their secondary because I think that is the biggest wild card. Of they send a ton of guys and a ton of talent to the NFL. So can Illinois reload in certain positions? I'm fascinated to find out about that, which is why. Coming back to it, my point about like if Drew Aller struggles in that game where he has to do a little bit more in his third game. I wouldn't be surprised if there are some struggles there and people go, wait a minute, I thought he was a 5-star talent. And you know, there's a little bit of a disappointment there from the quarterback, which is not to say it's his fault. But Nate, I got one more thing from the chat because this is important to me that you get your love on the channel. David says, I didn't realize how much I missed Nate until he finally came back. Nate, I feel the same way. Appreciate you coming back and spending a little extra time talking to us on the BWI Live show.
We got a super chat that we should take from Robert here. Do you see this?
Here we go. I did not see that. We
got to recognize the super chat. Thanks, Rob.
Thanks for getting that in on under the wire, and thanks for seeing that, Nate. Who do you expect to help Drew the most? Running backs or wide receivers? Thanks for the long form show. That's a hard question. I would say the running backs. I think the threat of the running game is going to open things up and make it easier for the quarterback.
And I'm gonna, of course, I'm gonna go curveball. I think the offensive line, honestly, I think the offensive line will be an asset to him where he's not consistently under duress. And if you have that, and then you have the pieces around you where he can make decisions, actually make decisions and use those instincts and make those throws, I think that positions him really well to have success. I always go back to what are the conditions that a guy has to succeed in. And if the conditions are you're constantly under duress, I don't care who it is. You're just probably not going to do very well. And so that, I think, is a huge piece of this.
A huge piece of the show is Nate. Nate, thank you so much for coming on the show. That'll do it for us today. Please like, subscribe, rate, review, all the different things. You got some bonus content today on the live show and on the podcast. We love you guys over on the podcast. Please download, subscribe, all that stuff. I'm Thomas Frank Carr. He's Nate Bauer. We will talk to you next week. We'll be reviewing the Elite 11 Passing Academy. We might have some special guests. We're doing a bunch of great stuff in the summer here on Blue White Illustrated. So subscribe and don't miss anything.